Welcome to Nature's Guardians. I'm Micah Siegel. Each week, I talk with people working to save and help animals around the world. They are nature's guardians, and you can become one too. Today, I'm talking with marine wildlife expert Laurenne Schiller. Welcome to the show, Laurenne.
Thank you, Micah.
Great to have you. So, you wrote a report about sharks and rays. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this is a scientific paper that I worked on with a really diverse group of scientists, and we were interested in learning more about whether different types of national and international laws and regulations had made any difference on the total shark catch in recent years. And so these are laws that were specifically targeting at anti-finning. So one of the biggest threats to sharks around the world is finning, which, as a lot of people know, is when a shark is caught, you remove the fins and you throw the shark back into the ocean alive. And a lot of legislation came into place related to addressing finning. And so we wanted to see if it had made a difference.
Okay, let's learn about it.
Sure, yeah. All right, so this is just very much an overview of the state of the world's sharks. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I've been fascinated with sharks. I'm actually a tuna fishery specialist. I've been studying tuna for about 15 years, but sharks and tuna often go hand in hand. And so I know a little bit about sharks. And then, yeah, we can get into any questions you might have. So to start, 3 reasons I love sharks. So sharks are among the oldest species that we still have on the planet. The earliest sharks are thought to have evolved over 400 million years ago. And there was this period called the golden age of sharks, which happened around 359 million years ago. And this is when they totally took off. And research suggests that we have evidence for about 2,000 to 3,000 ancient sharks on this planet. The oldest known group is these guys, which are the 6-gill sharks, and they evolved in the early Jurassic period. Most modern sharks that we see today sort of evolved after that. The amazing thing about sharks is that they have survived 5 mass extinctions, of course, including the one that killed off the dinosaurs. This is Megalodon, which most people know probably is like the most famous of the ancient sharks. And a really cool thing that I learned about Megalodon recently is that they are thought to have gone extinct as a result of killer whales and the evolution of killer whales, which in a lot of paleontologists think hunted down Megalodon, which is pretty amazing. Even though Megalodon was huge, it was not the largest animal that we've ever had on Earth. That is still the blue whale. And to put all of this in perspective, of course, down here, is when we humans evolved. And so we are a tiny, tiny fraction of this planet compared to sharks and many other species. The other thing I find incredible about sharks is they are an incredibly diverse group of animals. So there are over 511 different species of sharks, and so there's 511, and that's over 1,000 when you factor in skates and rays. And I know a lot of people don't love skates and rays, or maybe they don't think of them the same way they think of sharks, but they are also an amazing group of animals. And collectively, that's 1,000 animals on this planet in the elasmobranchs group, which is about double the number of primates we have and over 10 times the number of wild cats. So that's a lot of diversity for a group, and in part that's due to their long evolutionary lineage. So they range in size, of course. This is the largest. This is the whale shark. They can reach 60 feet in length. They're pretty amazing animals. They're obviously filter feeders. They have no teeth. Then you've got little guys like this. This is a type of lanternfish. This one, I think, is only about 8 inches long. So you can just see such immense diversity. They're found in both tropical and temperate environments, but there's also the Greenland shark, which is found in Arctic waters. I think these are incredible animals. Maybe you know this, but it's thought that Greenland sharks can live up to 500 years, which is the longest lifespan of any vertebrate on our planet. They're just amazing animals. And then, yeah, so there's also, like I said, over 500 different ray and skate species. I love mobilid rays like mantas. Often they'll leap out of the water like this, and it's thought that they do this to get parasites off of their backs, off of their bodies. But some people also think that they just do it for fun, like dolphins when they leap. And while most sharks are solitary animals, you also have hammerheads, which is a group of sharks that's often found in these really large aggregations, sometimes hundreds of different sharks in the same group and swimming together in a school. So it's just always, I'm always just in such awe of the diversity of sharks that we have on this planet, and obviously some of the adaptations that they have to survive. And so I'll just take you through two that I find really, really cool. So probably a lot of people know that they have these things called the ampullae of Lorenzini, which are on their snouts. You can kind of see these little dots. And this is a special sensory organ. And inside each of these dots is actually kind of like a jelly. And it's really neat because it helps sharks detect currents of like electromagnetic currents. So fish have a different electromagnetic charge in their body compared to the surrounding water. And so when the fish swims, that change in sort of current creates a really, really weak voltage, sort of the same way that a battery works. And sharks have the best electroreception on the planet, and they can sense even the tiniest changes in electrical currents. And I read an interview with the author of a recent study on this adaptation. He said it's equivalent to if you had like two 1.5 volt or like AA batteries connected 1,000 miles apart. A shark could tell you if you switched one of those off. And I just thought, like, that's phenomenal, right? And it's a really helpful adaptation, of course, when you're an animal that lives in the open ocean, like many sharks do. The other really cool adaptation, so this is a picture of a short fin mako, and they're part of a group of sharks called the lamnids, and they have the ability to actually heat their bodies above the ambient water temperature. It's an adaptation called regional endothermy. And most people think that sharks are cold-blooded, and that's true, but these guys and great whites and also the basking shark and a few others, they can actually be up to 15 degrees warmer than the water that they're swimming in. This is really useful for hunting because, like, if they're warmer than sort of all the other fish that they're hunting, obviously they're going to be really successful. And so this means that these types of sharks can live in colder water, and they can hunt efficiently in places where many other sharks can't live, right? Like great whites, you get them even off our coast here, maybe where you live too. Like, there's not a lot of sharks that can survive in water that cold, but great whites can because they have this adaptation as well. So 3 reasons sharks are threatened by humans. The most obvious, right, is they have this historic sort of misunderstanding and misrepresentation, often going back centuries, right? Like the ocean is a very inaccessible place. When people first started traveling across the ocean, and they would see sharks and whales and all sorts of marine life that they didn't understand. And so they made up stories around them. And a lot of that has sort of persisted over time. It hasn't helped with movies and other things that really vilify sharks. Although I definitely think a lot of that is changing, and it's changing because of some of the work that you do to raise awareness about sharks, and that's really important. The biggie, and I'll get into this a little bit more, is overfishing. And so overfishing of sharks mostly happens through one of 2 ways. So directed fisheries for sharks, where they're actually trying to catch sharks, and then the other is as bycatch. And so, as I mentioned, I study tuna fisheries, and tuna fisheries historically have a lot of bycatch of sharks, meaning they're not trying to catch them, but when they're catching tuna, they're collecting sharks in their nets or on their lines as well. And so kind of regardless of whether you're targeting sharks or catching them accidentally, a dead shark is a dead shark, unfortunately. And so overfishing is a huge driver of shark population declines on Earth. The other one, and this is a little bit more specific to coastal regions, of course, is coastal development. So this is an image of a recently developed city in the United Arab Emirates, I think. And so you can see that there's very little sort of coastal vegetation left. And that's a really big problem because a lot of sharks, especially coastal species, they use things like mangroves to raise their young. They're sort of considered shark nursery sites. And so when you remove that habitat, you're really, really impacting these shark nurseries and the ability of small sharks to grow and ultimately make their way into the population and into the ocean. So a little bit more on overfishing. So this paper came out a few years ago. Basically, they were looking at the percentage of sharks around the world that are threatened. They found that about 37.5% of the species in the IUCN Red List are considered threatened. That's so all of these ones, sorry, down here. And as you can see in the map, most of that coincides with coastal areas around the world. And of course, that's in part because there's a lot of shark species that live in coastal areas. But yeah, the data also suggests that this hasn't really changed much since the last time that they did this analysis. So yeah, it's a pretty big problem when you think about sharks and rays around the world. And I think a lot of people sometimes they think about like the iconic species like great whites and whale sharks and basking sharks. There's a lot of skates and rays and sort of smaller coastal sharks that we don't even know very much about, and they're already threatened or even critically endangered in certain places. And so we need to do better. So 3 things around the doing better that governments are already doing to try and help sharks. So this is in part what we looked at in our paper, and I'll show you a little bit of that in a second. So something that, as I mentioned, has been a big focus are these anti-finning laws. And so this relates to both finning on board vessels and making sure that fishers bring back the whole shark. And it also relates to the trade of fins. And so regulating which species can be traded, which species of sharks can be traded, has been a big, big focus. There's also some countries that have listings of sharks on their endangered species legislation. So this is a picture of a great white in both Canada and the United States. And I think also places like South Africa, maybe Australia, great whites are protected legally in those countries. It means you can't harass them, you can't kill them, you can't fish them. There's a lot of protections related to great whites. And actually in the US and Canada, we're starting to see higher numbers of great whites. So it's suggesting that maybe these laws are actually working, which is really positive. The other thing that's done, not as much as it should be, but is science-based fisheries management. So the United States, for example, has incredibly good shark fishery management measures, especially when compared to other places in the world, even Canada. We don't have a very good grasp on our country's catch of sharks, which is really unfortunate. And then we also see some of those international fishery organizations that sort of help regulate tuna fisheries. We see measures coming into place there related to things like not being allowed to keep certain species of sharks. So this is a picture of an oceanic white-tip shark. They're often caught in association with tuna fisheries sort of far offshore because they're a pelagic shark. And in the last few years, these organizations have adopted measures that basically say, if you catch one of these at sea, you cannot keep it. And they've done that for a few other sharks as well, like the silky shark, for example. And so these things are really positive. This is a figure from that paper I mentioned I was involved in. This is looking at the number of different measures that countries have put in place basically in my lifetime. I was born in 1988, so this is over the last 30-ish years. And you can see the really steep increase in the number of measures that have been put into place to try and protect sharks. And that red line refers to CITES listed sharks. And so CITES is the Convention on the International Trade of Endangered Species. And like I said, this is when countries sort of agree to regulate or in some cases prohibit the trade of certain wildlife. A classic example is ivory from elephants or very rare species of timber. Then another thing that countries are doing are these things called shark sanctuaries or marine protected areas. This is a really beautiful photo from French Polynesia, where sharks are actually revered and they're seen as sort of, there's a deep spiritual connection between locals and sharks. And so they would never fish for sharks, and they've actually put in these protected areas for sharks. So this is sort of the findings of our paper. You can see that these are sort of annual global estimates of how many sharks are killed around the world. It sort of aligns with that figure that I showed in terms of where all those critically threatened species are. So we looked at the time period of 2012 to 2019. We saw some sort of fluctuation in terms of catches over that time period, but we didn't really see any decrease. And the number of sharks caught today, which is around 100 million every year, is the same, roughly the same as it was in a study that came out a couple decades ago. So it's suggesting that despite all of that effort and all those laws and regulations, at least focused on finning, it hasn't made a huge difference. And part of the reason for that is because while we're trying, or while those efforts have really focused on finning, when you force fishers to land the whole shark because you can't take the fins anymore, you now have a whole shark, right? And so it means that other shark products like the meat and the oil can now also be used in addition to the fins. And so I think historically a lot of people thought of China as the biggest sort of importer of shark products because of the fins, for shark fin soup. And perhaps that was true in the past, but this map sort of shows the global extent of shark meat, fresh and frozen meat from sharks. And you can really see that it's a global issue. And I think the amazing thing for me when I read this stat, right, is that we often thought of the shark fin trade as driving shark trade, but it's actually the ray and meat trade as well now. Sorry, the shark and ray meat trade. So it's surpassed the value of fins, and that's really challenging because fins are a very sort of special commodity that you can target when it comes to being able to say adopt a law or prevent the trade. But shark meat often is really hard to detect, and I'll talk about that in a second. It looks like any other fish. And shark oil is used in so many different products around the world. These are things that everybody can do, which I like. So if you do eat seafood, lots of people still eat seafood. Lots of people eat tuna, and you can look for tuna that comes from fisheries that are more shark friendly than others. And so that would be gear types that don't really have high bycatch of sharks. So you can look for labels like pole and line, fad free, hook and line. The brands here are just examples. It will differ depending on where people live. The important thing is not the brand, but how the tuna was caught. And so if you're looking for these labels, there's a really good chance that your tuna comes from a fishery that doesn't catch sharks. If you like to eat seafood, oftentimes, like I mentioned, shark meat looks like many other types of fish, so it can be easily substituted. And if you're traveling, especially in tropical locations, like some of those coastal areas where there's high catches of sharks, you could be eating fish tacos or fish ceviche, and it might actually be shark meat, and lots of people wouldn't know that, right? They just think that they're eating local fish. And interestingly, it doesn't actually have to be these tropical locations. There was a study a few years ago looking at fish and chip shops in the United Kingdom, and they found that over 90% of fish products from 90 different fishmongers and takeaway restaurants contained dogfish, which was a locally endangered shark species. And the really shocking thing was that those products were not labeled as shark, but they were labeled as a different fish species. So just be wary and double check with anyone whenever you're ordering seafood. Like I said, there's shark oil is sort of part of the global cosmetic trade. And this is something that a lot of Western countries like US, Canada, many countries in Europe, we basically drive the global cosmetic trade. And there's a product called squalene, which is derived from sharks. And you can see here, this is just on the left, you can see squalene cleanser. It's not telling you where that squalene comes from. It's possibly or probably from sharks. The same company has a product that uses 100% plant-derived squalene. It's basically an oil. You can get squalene from like olives as well. So you don't need shark. You can find plant-based alternatives. I was really shocked. I was looking at my deodorant. And here, right, it just says squalene or squalane. And I didn't know. I'm like, is this plant-based squalene? Is this shark-based squalene? So, and you know, like I'm pretty aware of what's going on. And this was in my house. And I was like, oh my God, like I need to contact these guys. So I still need to do that. This was a few weeks ago. I was pretty surprised. So check your products. It's found in basically anything like lotions and anything that different types of cosmetics. It might be found in lipstick. You know, talk to your friends, your family, let them know that it's a big problem. The other thing, interestingly, is a lot of people take shark supplements. There's sort of this rumor that sharks don't get cancer. And so that this is an idea, this is a reason a lot of people take shark supplements. But there was this study by a cancer researcher pointing out the fact that sharks do get cancer and that this idea that eating shark cartilage will prevent this is totally silly, right? And yeah, so avoid shark supplements. There's not really any need to be taking them. Talk to your doctor if you're going to take supplements. Like, don't just start taking this stuff kind of for no reason. More than anything, like keep learning, keep sharing your love of sharks. Like the more people know about this stuff, obviously the better. So,
Sure, that was very interesting.
cool, yeah.
And I have a bajillion questions. So you were saying 100 million sharks are killed every year.
From fishing, yeah.
How many are killed as bycatch, like accidentally caught while they're farming tuna or something? And how many are intentionally set out to be caught?
So that's a really good question. Most of the ones that come from coastal fisheries, so about 90% of that catch, so I guess in the 80 to 90 million range, those would probably be targeted. Because most of the global shark catch comes from coastal areas. The bycatch side of things is a lot less. There can be bycatch in coastal fisheries as well, but yeah, it's mostly directed fishing for sharks, as far as we know.
Which shark species are doing well and which ones are in most trouble?
Yeah. So I really like the story of the great white. So back when Jaws came out and sort of there was this sort of view that great whites were these like man killers and everything, they were not doing so well for a while. That's partly because of people, but like targeted hunting, but also yeah, they could get caught as bycatch sometimes in longliners. But like I said, the US and Canada and some other countries have agreed to protect great whites. And so they're actually doing a lot better than they were historically. Or so we think. We're just seeing more of them, which could mean that they're changing their distribution. It could also mean that the ways in which that we observe sharks are better than they were 20 years ago. We have better technology to just find them. But in general, it's thought that sharks, that great white sharks are doing a lot better than they were. So a shark that I'm really concerned about is the short-fin mako shark. That was the one I showed the picture of. They still get caught in pretty high numbers in pelagic tuna fisheries, unfortunately. There's quite a few species, coastal sharks that I don't even really know about that I know are not doing well, just based on that paper. And then there's a lot of skates. And I find it really interesting because, like, for example, Canada, I think we have 18 different shark or skate populations in Canada. I think most of those are skates, but we don't have the information on 16 of them to know whether they're doing good or not. And so that's really not good. Like, countries need to do a better job of knowing the impact that their fisheries are having. And part of that is having good data on the shark populations that are in their waters, because otherwise you don't know if they're doing well or not.
So, what do you know about shark fin soup and the changes in the market for it?
Yeah, so shark fin soup is seen as a delicacy in many Asian countries traditionally. It's served at really fancy parties like weddings or like big family events and formal government events. And so there was a huge demand for shark fins for shark fin soup. And the really interesting thing about shark fin is its cartilage. It doesn't actually have flavor. It's more just texture. So they would put shark fin in, but they would flavor the chicken, the broth with like chicken broth. So it doesn't taste like anything, but it's seen as a status symbol. And sort of historically, the demand for shark fin soup is what sort of drove the shark fin industry and the fishing of sharks to meet that demand. Now there is evidence to suggest that the shark fin sort of demand from Asian markets is going down, and so we would have hoped that we would see decrease in catches, but unfortunately we don't, and that's for some of the reasons I talked about related to the demand for shark meat and shark oil, now that fishers are able to land the whole shark. Part of that is also public perception. So a few years ago, the Chinese government, I think, committed to no longer serving shark fin soup at banquets. There's been a lot of like sort of public awareness related to it. A few years ago, well, I guess it's longer now, I'm pretty old. Yao Ming, who was a really famous basketball player, I don't know if he still plays, this is like a long time ago, he took a stance against shark finning, and he's really well respected in the sort of Asian community. And so him saying like, don't do this, I think made a big difference. So there has been a lot of public awareness. It's also harder to actually ship shark fins. So even before some of these government trade regulations, or around the same time, companies were committing to it. So Costco, not like the grocery store, but there's a shipping company called Costco that ships stuff across oceans. Like 10 or 15 years ago, they committed to no longer shipping shark fins. And various airlines have said that they're not going to ship shark fins. And so there's just been a lot of focus on fins, which has probably reduced demand for fins. Like as we saw in that figure, they're not as valuable as the meat market anymore.
Is there real demand for shark meat, or is there a lot of leftover shark meat after shark fin?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in part, some places have always eaten shark. And then so now that they have to land sharks whole, there are more sharks. And so they're eating more sharks because it's always been part of their diet. And then there are countries that have actually sort of now that shark is available like any other fish, they're eating that too. And there's trade related to sharks for their meat. But the bigger thing too is their cartilage and their oil, right? So like those supplements that I mentioned, there is a huge global demand for shark supplements, and also squalene from their oil in the cosmetics industry. So I don't know which is driving it more, the meat or the oil market, and like byproduct market. But there are definitely some big players when it comes to those products. And the issue there, right, is, like I was saying before, we kind of knew shark fins were being sent to Hong Kong. Like that was sort of the area you could target. But when you have a product or a group of products that now is used so widely by so many countries, it makes it really hard to sort of mitigate that trade.
What's going on with Spain and Europe?
Spain has always had a directed fishery for sharks, and they've always been one of the world's top suppliers of shark meat. So they're a really big player when it comes to the meat market, and they kind of always have been. Yeah, so like Spain is kind of like one of the epicenters, right? And so they can send things to Japan, and then Japan will send things all the way over to like Panama. So you kind of have these like global hubs. A lot of sort of these coastal European countries still eat a lot of shark, and then also, yeah, Brazil is a big shark meat consumer, both in terms of sharks that get imported from other places, but also sharks from their coastal fisheries. And it's my understanding, actually, one of the co-authors on this paper, he's Brazilian, and he sort of told us a little bit about the situation in his country. And shark meat has always been sort of eaten there, but it's increasing. And some of those concerns around like mislabeling, like when you go to the beach and you order ceviche, he's like, lots of people are eating shark and they don't know it.
It seems to me like there's just too much shark meat coming into the market.
The challenge is that it's very different in different places, right? And so it's not necessarily like there will be some countries where there actually is a high demand to eat shark and shark meat because it is inexpensive. And I think it's important to remember that like sharks and other species, they don't exist in isolation, right? So you've got fisheries for sharks, you've got fisheries for, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of other species of fish, many of which are also overfished and not doing well. And unfortunately, it's not really like a simple substitution. In many cases, you get situations of mislabeling, or like when people will label fish and chips as fish, but it's actually shark. Sometimes they don't even know that they're getting shark. Like the seafood industry as a whole, especially for generic sort of white fish, which could include shark, but it also includes things like cod, pollock, hake. Like there's a bunch of different species which all kind of look the same. And unless you do like a DNA test, it's really hard for somebody eating fish and chips to kind of tell them apart, right? It's just deep fried fish. And so in many cases, fishmongers will also think that they're getting something, but it might be a totally different product. And I think it's just really important that when we think about the demands put on sharks and on shark fisheries, there's also sort of that bigger picture of the global fishing industry, which targets many, many other things. And at times there are these sort of fluctuations in availability, and they'll substitute whatever is available.
So, what is a good sustainable number of sharks to be caught every year?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. That's something that a lot of scientists are trying to figure out. And I think it's really important. Remember, like when I was talking about the diversity of sharks, right? So, for example, the number of whale sharks that you could catch sustainably every year will be very different from like the number of blue sharks that you can catch sustainably every year, because sharks have really, really different life histories, and they produce all sorts of like different numbers of young. And so there's a lot of things that have to be calculated when it comes to determining a sustainable number. That said, yeah, it really is species dependent, but what we do know right now is that for most species, the catch is too high. So I can't give an exact number because this is like a global total of all sharks. It's not sort of at the species level, but they are working right now. One of the first ever stock assessments with a catch quota has been implemented for blue shark, actually in the Atlantic Ocean, which is really encouraging. And remember how I said that it's all done in tonnage, it's not done in individuals. So they have come up with a science-based number of blue sharks that can be sustainably caught in the Atlantic Ocean. And I think that it's really important that when we do come up with these numbers, that they are done at a scale that is fitting, right? So coming up with a sustainable number of blue sharks or smooth skates, right? Like anything that it has to be at the level of the species.
Do you think CITES is helping or hurting sharks?
I think CITES has been actually quite beneficial for sharks. I think it was slow to get going. Initially, they just sort of adopted one or two kind of here and there, but last year or the year before, they took on a whole bunch of sharks, like I think over 100, all in the same sort of family. And so that will be hopefully really helpful. The important thing to remember about CITES for any animal, not just sharks, is that it regulates trade. It doesn't regulate catch. So if you have a country that's catching like 90% of the sharks, which is not possible, but hypothetically, and they're eating them all or using them all in their country, they're not trading them, then CITES can't do anything. CITES is just for trade. And so if that country doesn't want to eat any sharks and they want to export all of them, then in theory, CITES could be really, really beneficial. And there is some research out there to show that CITES is working for sharks. But like I said, it's been a little slow going.
Thank you so much for talking with me today, Laurenne, and thank you for watching. You can help animals by hitting the like button and subscribing to this channel. I'll see you next time on Nature's Guardians. Bye.